Hello. I just wanted to give a very quick introduction before tonight's performance, which I'm aware is sold out, so well done everyone on being here and getting in, which is good. So Diederik Peeters is a Belgian artist who we're really thrilled to bring because he was with the support of De Bruyne Grand, who are an amazing arts institution that support Belgian artists in Amsterdam. I'm not going to go into any detail about what Diederik's talking about because I believe you might have some idea, but he's an artist that primarily works in performance, and part of his work is explaining or exploring the disembodied voice. So without further ado, I give the stage to Diederik.
Thank you for the invitation, Nathalie and Arion, who's also there, and thank you also for the introduction, Nathalie. At the end of the 19th century, a Romanian count travels to Paris, where he falls madly in love with a young and beautiful opera singer. But soon after their first meeting, she suddenly dies. So devastated, the count returns to his castle in Romania. And because the opera singer had been famous, she had recorded some opera arias on phonographic cylinders, which was a technique that had just started to be used. Determined never to forget her, the Count takes these recordings home with him and has a white marble sculpture made after an image of her face. He places this sculpture in front of his fireplace, and in the evenings he sits crying, looking at the sculpture and listening to the beloved but eternally extinct voice. Now, the villagers who live at the foot of the castle, they have of course never heard of a way to capture voices. And when they hear this strange and raspy woman's voice reverberating through the castle, they look up and see this ghostly white silhouette of a woman. It is then that they decide to give the Count his name, Dracul, which means devil in Romanian. Without realizing it, these villagers were the first witnesses of the occult link between the recorded voice, death, and afterlife. Exactly 20 years before Bram Stoker publishes his Dracula, on a cold December morning in 1877, a young man shows up at the offices of the magazine Scientific American in New York. Without much fuss, he places a small machine in front of the editors and activates it with a crank. To the astonishment of all, the machine says, "Hello, how are you? I am a phonograph." The machine had spoken. It had a voice. This young man, named Thomas Edison, had invented the first instrument possessing that sinister capacity to bring back to life a voice that had in reality already been extinct. It brought the memory of a voice back to life. In fact, this ghost machine could tear out a voice from the body that emitted it and subsequently resurrect it ad infinitum. The device could preserve a voice beyond death even, and revive it infinitely, like a wandering soul. Invisible by nature, sound is perceived as a spectral form. Moreover, it has that strange particularity of always disappearing. As soon as I say the word voice, the sound of my voice is gone. And all that remains is the memory of that word and the memory of my voice. As soon as you make a sound, it's gone. So there's always a certain sense of loss and of death. Sound and the spoken word seem intimately connected to death. Exactly 20 years after the first publication of Dracula, F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu opens in Berlin. Although unauthorized, it is the first adaptation for the novel, of the novel for the cinema. And on the same day, Thomas Edison, who turned grey in the meantime and had become with Ford and Walt Disney one of the three faces of American industry, appears on the cover of that same old Scientific American. Under his portrait picture, we read the intriguing title, "Those of the Beyond and Why I Seek to Communicate with Them." In the interview, the inventor discusses his necrophone. "I have been working for some time now," he says, "on a scientific apparatus allowing personalities that have left our world, the dead, to communicate with the living." Still a week later, Europe's first public radio broadcast goes on the air in France. The idea of receiving voices without a body in one's own living room was even more troubling than that of the phonograph. The fact that a voice could be traveling invisibly and wirelessly through a space and even through solid walls was more magical than, or seemed more magical than scientific, or even plainly paranormal. Listening to the radio is literally hearing voices, right? So it's hallucinating, in other words. So it is no coincidence that the birth of public radio broadcasting coincides with a marked revival of spiritism. You know, that notion that in the ether there are spirits and voices that belong to the dead. On February 14th, 1931, the iconic film with Bela Lugosi in the role of Dracula opens in New York. On February 15th, that same year, a day later, Thomas Edison dies in New Jersey. His obsession with spirits and with the peculiar connection between sound recording techniques, the disembodied voice, and so-called occult phenomena will find its climax in his ultimate project that will occupy him during the last 10 years of his life, to phonograph the voice of ghosts. There are few traces left of this mysterious apparatus, which was only the subject of a few statements from its inventor to the press of the time. However, many scientists and inventors have since followed the path traced by Edison, Friedrich Jürgenson and Konstantin Raudive among the most well-known. The phenomenon is now known as EVP, electronic voice phenomena. And the technique most often used to hear these electronic voices and to get in touch with the beyond actually is ITC, instrumental trance communication. The results obtained are sometimes flabbergasting. For the IMPAKT Festival, several people have been invited to say a few words. Because I find it somewhat unfair and almost discriminatory on the part of the organizers to have limited these invitations to living people, I would like to share the time that I was given with some guests from the beyond. I propose, therefore, to summon some spirits here tonight so that they too may say a word or two. So, challenging my own skepticism and yours, I would like to propose a spiritist seance using the technique of instrumental trance communication. Okay, so, oh, sorry, this microphone. You all get the idea, right? We're going to do a little spiritist seance now, all together. A session of ITC, instrumental trance communication. Yeah, so I mean, basically that just means that we'll be using this microphone here to try to make contact with the beyond. Before we start, I'm gonna tell you straight away, I can't guarantee that it will work, okay? I mean, I've been trying this before a couple of times and it doesn't always work. I mean, to be totally honest, only one of my previous attempts was actually somewhat successful. But still, really, I think if we all put our minds to it and if we work together, then I really think there's a good chance that something will happen. Okay? So, before we start, and this is very important, it's really crucial, I would like to urge you all to put your skepticism aside, to suspend your disbelief. Now, I know from experience actually that this can be quite difficult, but still it would be good, it would be very good, because if there's too many people that decide on beforehand that it's not gonna work, well, that's just gonna block us a little bit.
That's logical.
Spirits will be less susceptible or will be less inclined to manifest themselves
among us.
That's logical. So maybe some instructions now or precautions for our own safety. If it should work, who knows, then it's important to know that you should never insult a spirit, okay, or provoke it, because apparently the consequences risk being rather unfortunate. The throat. During the seance, you might have the impression of having a bit of a cold and a somewhat dry throat. And you might feel as if your energy is being pumped out of you. But apparently that's completely normal, so don't worry. It's just the spirit that uses our energy
to communicate.
Okay, so I think we can proceed. We can start now.
Oh, the circle.
Of course. It's very important. I mean, we have to make what is called a circle of confinement. That's just to avoid spirits or other entities to possess us or do other dangerous things. So, just a moment. By the power of the sacred salt,
I trace this circle to confine and to control all entities that come to us. Almost there.
Looks good to me, no? Bon. Before we start, one more microphone readjustment. Maybe we should. Yes, Yes is the light technician in the back. Could we maybe dim the lights a little bit, for concentration? Wow. Put a little bit of blue in there as well. That's good. Okay, I think we're ready. So let's concentrate. Let's concentrate and listen for any signs. But if you want to, you can close your eyes. Let's just listen for any signs from the beyond. Hello? Is anyone there on the other side? if anyone's there, it would be great if you could intervene. I mean, if Providence is willing, you are free, of course. We don't want to push you or anything. Bon, I don't know if it's gonna work.
But we shouldn't despair.
No. Hello? If anyone's there, it would be really nice if you could give us a little sign. Come say hello, maybe? Hello?
Yes.
There was someone. He said yes.
I am here. What is it that you want from me?
Yes, what do we want from you? That's an excellent question. Now we have to ask you a question, right? That's the procedure. Maybe anyone in the audience has a question? Any question? I think... No?
Wasn't it you who proposed to invite spirits to say a few words for the occasion of this IMPAKT Festival?
Yes, absolutely.
Can I do a lecture?
What? Sorry?
I would like to do a lecture.
Wow, but that's very generous of you. Sir? What is it about, your lecture? Hello?
My lecture is about Pythagoras.
What? Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician?
Among other things, he was a mathematician, yes.
Well, that really sounds super fascinating, and we would love to hear your lecture. But you see, the thing is, so we're part of this festival, and there's a program tonight, and it's a little bit tight. I think we still have like 10 more minutes or so, and then...
Shut up! And listen. Once upon a time, in antiquity, there was a very, very wise man. His name was Pythagoras, and he had a group of followers, a kind of fan club that called themselves the acousmatics. That's the Greek word for listeners. And this gang of youngsters, they only had 2 rules.
That's absolutely fascinating, sir. Hello, sir. What about these 2 rules?
Primo, they had to be present at every lecture their idol did. Segundo, during the lecture, they had to hide behind a curtain in order to avoid seeing their master. And only after 5 full years of blind and silent listening, they were allowed to see his face and were accepted as sworn members of the sect. Now, for this gang of groupies, it was their refusal to look that transformed their master into a spirit or even a god. Their choice to remain in the dark turned a living man into a ghost. In other words, the creating force of darkness produced this transformation.
Whoa, that's almost a bit scary.
Now, as for the immortality of the soul... Wait.
What's happening? Sir? Who is there?
Hello.
Hello?
Oh no, it's the lamp.
Who?
The lamp.
Indeed, I did invent the electric lamp, yes. And 1,042 other useful things.
No. Are you Mr. Edison?
Have you heard these footsteps?
We heard your footsteps, yes?
That was a joke, you see. The voice without a body and footsteps without feet.
You will see an excellent sense of humor.
Well, it's just that I would like to specify a few things from a scientific point of view.
And he has a talent for squatting the lectures of others.
Well, you see, it's just that I heard you mentioning my necrophone before, and I do believe some clarifications are in place, you see? Because my necrophone is indeed able to capture voices, but these voices do not belong to any spirits from beyond the grave. No, sirree, they don't.
But then it doesn't work, actually, your machine.
Oh, it works perfectly fine. The thing is that these voices it captures, they ain't ghost voices, but just plain old echoes, reverberations. You see, what I discovered is that sound never dies. You know that, but when we speak, right, we create waves in the air, right? We call them sound waves. And what my necrophone reveals is that, contrary to popular belief, these sound waves, they don't just disappear, they don't just decay and die out. Nope, they're only becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually they become so small and so weak that we can't hear them anymore. But my necrophone can pick up these vibrations and amplify them. You know, if I would travel, for example, to whatever mount it was that Jesus gave his sermon on, my necrophone would be able to capture the vibrations of his voice that are still floating around in the air there. And we would actually be able to hear the voice of no one less than Jesus Christ himself. But still, that wouldn't be the ghost of Jesus speaking to us, but just an echo of his voice and words of old.
But that's a bit disappointing then.
Well, that depends on your point of view now, doesn't it? You see, my necrophone is so sensitive that it would most certainly be able to capture these ghost voices if only they existed. And so because it doesn't, I can confirm with scientific certainty that these ghost voices do not exist, and therefore that scientifically proves that life after death does not exist either. So, in other words, and I'm sorry to be the party pooper here, but when you're dead, all right?
But wait, I don't get, I mean, you are there now, you are speaking to us now.
Like I said, boy, that's just an illusion. And that whole spiritist thing ain't nothing but a scam. Just a good, plain old, simple hoax.
But I don't get it. Maybe you are dead, no? I mean, and we are having this conversation. We're in contact with this microphone, ITC.
Ha! Instrumental transcommunication. What a joke. Hey, it's a total joke. Did you hear me, boy? I said, when you're dead, all right?
Death is not a question of everything or nothing, my little friend. The end is not yet quite the end. Hair and nails may continue to grow.
Hey, Mr. Count, you believe whatever you want to believe, okay? Science and technology permit me to stop believing and to know, to be absolutely goddamn sure. And all the rest is irrational mumbo-jumbo.
Ha! Of course, the irrational, the knockdown argument of any enlightened materialist.
The irrational, yes, you know, superstition and the likes.
What a boring and infantile dichotomy, the rational versus the irrational. Fortunately, reality is not as simple as that, and much more interesting.
Look, since we conquered the creatures of darkness like yourself, the world is better off, no?
Oh, a light to darkness, what pretension! When everything is all brilliant and shiny, we can't see anything anymore. When it is lit too brightly, let me tell you a story. A young man dies because of a respiratory disease. In a way, he chokes to death. Now, after he dies, his mouth stays wide open, as if death itself had wanted to fix him in his atrocious suffering. Now, in order to erase this awful image, his wife tries with all her strength to close the mouth of her dead husband. But despite her efforts, the mouth stays wide open. Dispirited and in shock, the woman runs away, but when she comes back a little later, she finds her husband with his mouth closed, resting with a broad smile on his face.
Okay, and so what? I mean, what's the point you're trying to make here, Mr. Count?
For the woman, there was no question that her husband had given her a sign, in the form of a joke, almost. Who is to say that this was irrational of her, merely a coincidence, and not a sign of tenderness that the deceased had addressed to his wife?
Oh, but that's physiology is what it is. I mean, I'm sorry to break your illusions here, Mr. Count, but the second day after death, the facial skin relaxes. It's normal.
Oh, and because there's a physiological explanation, it can't be a sign.
Whoa. Hey, you see signs wherever you want to see signs, my dear Count. Be my guest.
Death is not the end of presence. We live with the dead. We converse with them. Now, if we accept this dialogue, if we look and if we listen for their signs, our lives are enriched. And there are things opening up behind our sense of what is normal.
Well, since we have conquered the creatures of darkness like yourself, I mean, the world is better off, no?
Oh, but there's more pleasure in my night than in your light, you boring little radio retailer.
Look, it's simply impossible to use electric lights and wireless networks and all, and at the same time believe in ghosts.
Excluded from our conscious life because of enlightened know-it-alls like yourself. Spirits are finding their way to us through interstices, through dreams.
Oh yes, of course, dreams.
Or through obsessions.
Look into the mirror, you little freak. Oh, that's so easy, you see. He thinks I'm obsessed with death just because I happen to have invented the electric chair.
And by means of publicity stunt for his little chair, he even electrocuted an elephant.
Well, and that you are sexually obsessed, everybody knows that, right?
The elephant was called Topsy. Poor little Topsy. Where is she?
Mr. Count? Hello? Did he leave?
Ah, just let him be. It's normal my lights chase him away. Wait. Can you hear that?
Yes, I can hear something, but what is it?
Damn! He went to get Topsy to annoy me. And that damn beast is rather resentful, you see? So, I'm sorry, but I better be going now. Very nice to meet you all.
Yes, goodbye.
Bye.
And thanks. Are they all gone? Well, okay. Wow. I'm really happy it worked out all right. I mean, something happened, right? So thank you. I think you did a really good job in suspending your disbelief. I mean, as I told you earlier, this was only my second successful seance, so it's really pretty cool. And I really think this wouldn't have happened without your good vibes. I mean, and there were even two of them. Last time there was only one that showed up. Quite a grim character though, pretty scary. So it was a lot darker. He was a singer, actually. I mean, a singer. He used to be the lead vocalist, apparently, of a notorious Norwegian black metal band. Now, I didn't know that, but these Norwegian black metal dudes back in the 90s, they weren't particularly known for their good sense of humor. They were really pretty serious in their adoration of anything that had to do with death and destruction and so on. I mean, this guy in particular, he didn't tell me this himself, but after the seance I did some Googling and I found out that his stage name, his real name was Per, Norwegian I imagine, but so his stage name was Dead, D-E-A-D. And for concerts, he would paint his face in order to look like a corpse, and he would be cutting himself and stuff. And they had big heads on stage and throw buckets of blood into the audience. Pretty gross, really. And apparently, for this guy, this wasn't just about putting up a show. he would be totally serious about it. Like he would bury his stage clothes, for example, a week before a concert, so that they would really have that particular rotten stench during the concert. Or he would be carrying around a plastic bag with some dead birds in there, and then before going on stage he would open the bag to inhale the smell just to get into the right mood or something. Really disgusting. And eventually, even before the release of the debut album of their band, he committed suicide, blew his head off with a shotgun, and apparently left a note saying, "Please excuse the blood." Now, when his friend, the guitar player of the band, found him, the first thing he did was run to a shop to buy a camera and go back to take a picture of the scene. And it's this picture that's on the sleeve of their first album. It's this really awful photograph of this guy with his brains all gone and wearing a t-shirt saying, "I love Transylvania." But anyways, why am I telling you all this horrible stuff? Of course, Cotard, but wait, I can take off this microphone now, no? Wait.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
You hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so after his suicide, actually, so the suicide of Dad, the singer, the vocalist, some neurologists found out that he was probably suffering from Cotard's syndrome. And the Cotard syndrome is named after Jules Cotard, who was a French psychiatrist avant la lettre at the end of the 19th century. And so in 1877, the exact same year, mind you, that Edison provided the disembodied voice with an afterlife by inventing the phonograph, that exact same year, this Dr. Cotard was the first one ever to describe a patient of his that was suffering from what he called délire de négation. So that's like a delusion of negation or something. And it's that same syndrome that is now commonly known as the Cotard syndrome. Now, one of the most peculiar symptoms of this disorder is the fact that the people that are suffering from it are absolutely convinced that they are dead. They are obviously alive, but they truly and deeply believe that they are dead or immortal, because paradoxically somehow that kind of comes down to the same thing if you think about it. No, but it's true. So there were patients also who were complaining that they were dead, but that also really had the feeling that they had been around for centuries and centuries. Anyway, so in 1877, while Edison is presenting his machine to Scientific American, Cotard describes this case of a middle-aged woman who complains of having neither brain, nor nerves, nor intestines, and her heart stopped beating too. She doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep, because she's dead, right? So why would you want to eat or sleep? At some point, Cotard notes her saying that she is just a voice and nothing more. And she's afraid that if that goes too, her voice, then she won't be anything anymore. Now, there's other patients with the Cotard syndrome that have, for example, the specific feeling that worms are crawling over or inside their bodies, and they have a hard time looking at themselves in the mirror because they have difficulties dealing with the image of their own existence. And anyways, all these people, they continue to move and to act within their environment. They are, in that sense, absolutely and firmly alive,
but somehow for them nothing feels real, which in their view can only be attributed to the fact that they are dead. They are also, surprisingly, they keep on reasoning and apparently very subtly often. In fact, this going on to believe against all contradictions and paradoxical facts is actually the core or the very essence of a delusion. Anyways, as you can imagine, this disorder, it remained a total mystery for modern medical science for a long, long time. Doctors couldn't figure out what the exact cause was, or they couldn't propose a remedy either. Actually, Jung, you know, Carl Gustav, the famous psychoanalyst, he treated a patient with Cotard syndrome in the early 1910s, just after his fallout with Freud. And apparently after a while, Jung started to question the validity of his own diagnosis. He actually started to doubt whether this patient of his was really sick or whether it was rather Jung himself that was delusional. So he started wondering, in other words, what if this patient of mine is actually some kind of immortal angel or zombie that has been around for centuries and centuries and that now desperately wants to get out but can't somehow because he is already dead. And so now there is theories, and they're quite convincing, that Jung actually helped this patient of his to commit suicide. It was only in the 1990s, with CT scans and everything, that neurologists finally discovered the exact malfunction in the brain that causes the Cotard syndrome. And so now we understand that these people, because of this disorder or this malfunction in their brains, they do not have any physical feelings, they do not feel any pain, which also explains self-mutilation, which is another symptom. And so it seems that the only way that the brain can deal with that is to trick itself into believing that it just doesn't exist, that it's dead.
And what if these CT scans are wrong and Dr. Jung was right all along?
But I didn't know that you were still there. That's... Well, I think we've had enough for tonight. Thank you.